Hey, everybody.
We thank you all for joining us for this town hall. We are looking forward to having an exciting and robust discussion this evening. We ask that as you log on that you would mute yourselves. Thank you very much.
Trying to get away from them again.
We have a number of people who have registered for this event, and so we're going to just give people a few minutes to log in.
Good evening, Grady.
Good evening, everybody. We thank you all for joining us.
Good evening.
We ask that as you join us that you would put yourselves on mute unless you are the person speaking. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are just signing in, we have about 200 people who registered for this event, and so we want to just give everyone a few minutes to log in. We have several people who have already logged in, and we're waiting for, we just want to give everyone an opportunity to make sure that they don't miss anything and that they're able to log on.
Is Mel Franklin on?
I don't see that he has logged in yet.
Yes, I saw his name.
You did? Okay, great.
Make him a panelist.
We also invite everyone, as you're logging on, to say hello and to tell us where you're from.
Hello, this is John Salzberg from Sandy Spring, member of the Quaker meeting here.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind just putting it in the chat, I see a few people have signed on in the chat room. Just state your name and tell us where you're from.
And dangerous and challenging President Trump's efforts to brand him as extreme. You know me. You know my heart.
If you could please mute yourselves, that would be great.
A soft spot for rioters? Really? That I'm mischaracterizing mine just yesterday.
Hello? I can't hear you.
Okay, we're asking everybody to log in the chat room to say where you're from and to give greetings, but we're asking you to put yourselves on mute as you log in. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Leah Green, Maryland Cure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Donna Marks Pleasant from Montgomery Village, Maryland.
Okay, thank you so much. If you could put it in the chat room, we would
Trying to
appreciate
find
it.
it. Okay.
Okay. And we ask that everyone mute themselves, please. And we're going to get started in a few minutes.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and we ask that you put yourself on mute, please.
I'm mute. Okay.
We're happy to have so many people from across the state logging in, and we ask that you put in chat where you're calling from. Several people are still logging in, and we ask that you mute yourselves as you log in, and you're invited to put into chat a greeting, hello, and tell us where you're calling from.
My name is Dana Head. I'm calling from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, my name is Dana Head. I'm calling from Upper Marlboro, Maryland.
Okay, Dana, thank you so much for checking in. If you could put yourself on mute and put that information in the chat room, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm new at this, but I'll try my best, okay? Thank you.
Uh-huh. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, and so we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. We just want to give other folks another minute to check in and log on. We ask everyone to please mute yourselves as you log in. And we're excited that we have several representatives from Prince George's County with us, and we are looking forward to a very robust and interesting conversation.
Am I muted now? Yeah. No, you just unmuted yourself.
Orlando, I think we should get started.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. We really appreciate that all of you have logged in to participate in this very interesting discussion this evening. The fact that nearly 200 people have registered for this event is clearly evidence that the community, you all believe that these issues are important. My name is Olinda Moyd, and I am a 25-year resident of Prince George's County, a native Baltimorean. Sorry, got to give a shout out for Baltimore. I am a defense attorney and an activist, and I serve on the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform's Executive Board, and I chair the Behind the Walls work group. Just to go over a few house rules for the evening, we ask that everyone mute yourselves. Please try to find whatever kind of device you're on. Try to find that mute button so that you can mute yourselves when you are not speaking. We invite everyone to also put your questions in the chat room. We will have an open question and answer period at the end. We ask that you put your questions in the chat room. You're also invited to use your reaction buttons. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you like what's being said or not? We also invite you to use your clapping hands and applause if you like what's being said. We will have a poll about halfway through the evening because we want to make sure that we get information that we can capture what is coming from the community this evening, what your thoughts are about these issues so that we can share this information as we proceed with our work at Major and other organizations. Again, we will have an open question and answer period at the end of the evening. And so we invite everyone to participate by putting your questions into the chat room and participating by letting us know what's on your mind. We will now have a brief welcome by Phil Karoom, who is the executive board member he's the executive chair of the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform. And we also have Sandra Pruitt, who is also going to give us welcome. I believe that Jerry McLaurin might also have some welcoming comments. And so Phil, I will turn it over to you to speak for about 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes, and I am timing folks. Phil, you want to speak on behalf of the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform? And we have your face on the screen, so.
Okay, so let me thank everyone for joining us for this important panel discussion tonight. And also let me thank the People for Change and the PFC Black Chamber of Commerce for co-sponsoring with us. I'll just say that Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform is a group of all volunteers from all different parts of the state who have for 5 years been working on the idea of justice reinvestment to reduce the amount of taxpayer dollars that our state spends on getting people locked up and increasing the amount of money that is spent on getting people restored and rehabilitated to be productive members of our communities. It is a group which is nonpartisan. We have Republican and Democratic members, and we are looking for the measures that will be most effective and that will make the change that we need to see. And that's what we're hoping to hearing in our panel discussion tonight. And again, thank you everyone for listening, and thanks to our panelists for participating.
Thank you, Phil. And Jerry or Sandra? I believe, Jerry, you're gonna
Hi,
speak.
this is
okay.
Sandra Pruitt, the
Okay.
Executive Director of the PFC Coalition. We'd like to just welcome everyone. And for those who may not know of the mission of the PFC Black Chamber and the PFC Coalition, the Chamber is a membership organization representing Black businesses, and their mission is to strengthen the capacity of those businesses to serve their communities by providing a collective voice, fair access to capital, and leadership support. The PFC Coalition is a membership organization representing over 300 nonprofits and minority businesses whose mission is to build the capacity of the businesses and nonprofits by providing assessment, support, and expansion services. Jerry McLaurin serves on the board of Major, and Jerry, if you'd like to share a few words in your work with the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform.
Yes, I sit on the executive team with Major, and also I want to thank everyone for coming out today, because this particular topic is very important to our organization and our county and our community. And I think that what we're doing here is bringing awareness. Here we are in the state of Maryland, which Maryland is the #1 in all the 50 states that incarcerate the most Black Americans here in the United States. We make up 70% of the population in the prison system here in Maryland, but we only make up 30% of the population here overall in the state of Maryland. So we 70% of the incarcerated, but we're 30% of the population. And that's where we need to draw the attention on how can we make policy changes to get the knees off the Black folks' neck, while at the same time they continue to get incarcerated. So I want to have a discussion to talk about, what is it that we can do now to help stop the pipeline to prison.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jerry. And you certainly hit the nail right on the head regarding what we're going to be speaking about this evening. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, Sandy. And thank you, Jerry. So this evening, we will talk about what some of the major causes are for the disparities that we see in the disproportionate number of young Black men that are swept up in our incarceral system. This nation is in a racial crisis right now, and Maryland leads the way in terms of the number of young Black men who are incarcerated in our system. For the last 2 weeks, you all have probably watched the Democratic convention, the Republican convention. There's been a lot of focus on what's happening nationally. But we know that it's through our local legislation and our local laws that impact us day to day and really impact and influence what happens in our justice system. In November 2019, the Justice Policy Institute issued a report. And I believe that some of the authors of the report, Mark Schindler and Ryan King, are on the call with us this evening, and we really appreciate your being a part of this discussion. But the information in that report is very startling. Maryland is higher than any other state and double more than the national average when it comes to incarcerating young Black men. This is not acceptable. The report also confirms that these disparities are not pronounced for people serving the longest sentences, but most of them are serving sentences that were imposed on them when they were emerging young adults, that is between 18 and 24 years old. I've had the pleasure in my volunteer work of working and teaching behind bars of getting to know many of the men and women who are serving life sentences. And the report also emphasized that when you talk about this population, it's an aging population, and it's a population that we know from the reports that the recidivism rate, if they're given the chance to be released, is very, very low. So we are very excited this evening that we have several of our Prince George's County representatives here so that we can talk about some of these issues. We can ask questions regarding what is being done and what can be done legislatively and otherwise through policy work to curb this trend that we see. Our panelists this evening include Aisha Braveboy, who is the Prince George's County State's Attorney, and we are so happy to have you this evening. And all of our panelists have long, extensive bios, and on our webpage, if you click on the link beside their name, you can read up on all of them. But they have all agreed that we want to spend most of this evening talking about the issues. But all of them have very impressive bios. We also have with us this evening Eric Barron, who is the Prince George's County, Maryland delegate in the House of Representatives and has been since 2015. And we're so glad to have you, Mr. Barron. We also have Calvin Hawkins with us, Prince George's County Council Vice Chair. He's an at-large member who's been on the council since 2018. And we have Mel Franklin, who is also an at-large member, who was formerly from District 9 and now serves at large. And so we are very happy to have you all with us this evening. And so we're going to jump right into it. The people want to hear from you. And so we're going to jump right into the questions that we have for you this evening. The format will be that I will ask some questions that you've all been made aware of. And then we're going to take a few questions from the chat room. Then I will ask the round two, the second question, and we will also take a few questions from the chat room. And so the first question that we have for the evening, and I will pose this question to each of you and allow you 2 minutes to respond. What do you believe are the primary causes of this disproportionate impact of young Black men incarcerated in the state and in Prince George's County? And let's start with ladies first. Let's start with our state's attorney, Aisha Braveboy.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate the partnership and also this very important discussion. You know, I kind of get to see the justice system. I've seen it actually from various different lenses because I've obviously been a member of this community. I served as a state delegate in a legislative capacity. Now I serve in an executive capacity as state's attorney. And I've worked very closely with law enforcement in the community. I've also worked with victims and I've worked with advocates. So I've kind of worked with, you know, all of the players in the system too. And so what I would say is that, you know, on a daily basis, what we see are arrests after arrests of primarily young Black men in our communities for various different types of offenses. But I can tell you that where we see disproportionately high numbers of very young Black males in particular is in the more violent crimes like carjackings, robberies, murders, very serious offenses that require the state to ensure that the public is protected. So I think that the types of crimes that are being committed in our community, and while the state is about 33% Black, Prince George's County is about 65 to 67% Black. So we have more Black people here. And so more of the crimes that we see every day are committed by Black people. And so we see that. But what we also see, and what I've also seen, is that we have a number of people in our system who get pretty lengthy sentences. Now, some of it is based on the nature of the offense. So if you commit a murder, your maximum penalty is life. And sometimes the state seeks life, sometimes it seeks some other term number of years for incarceration. But what I see is that based on the nature of the offense and the criminal history of that individual, we have something called sentencing guidelines, which judges use to impose sentences on individuals. And those guidelines, depending on your criminal history, could be pretty large. I mean, pretty lengthy in terms of the number of the number of years you might face if you commit certain types of offenses. So I do see it as many factors, but primarily in terms of why we're seeing it in Prince George's County, I can tell you is because of the nature of the offense and the criminal history of those defendants. Now, I can tell you that I think there's a path forward that I believe we should be on in order to reduce the number of individuals, number one, in the justice system, and number two, the length of those sentences that they're facing. But it's a balancing act because you have to keep the community safe. You want to get justice for victims. And so, you know, again, you have to weigh everything, including the seriousness of the offense. But I do believe that we can look at our sentencing guidelines. I think we can give more reconsiderations than we are given in the system to give people an opportunity after serving a period of time to be reconsidered in terms of their sentence. And I'll talk a little later in the program about some of the things that my office has proactively done, especially around the issue of juvenile lifers, to really give people that second chance. But that's what I'm seeing, you know, just from my perspective. When I look at the cases that we get in, I look at who's committing the offenses. It's primarily young Black men. And a lot of these offenses are very violent and very serious, where you have victims in communities that have been impacted.
Thank you so much for your comments. And I know that there will be a lot of questions for you. And so we will come back with some follow-up questions. Thank you. Mr. Hawkins, Calvin Hawkins, we ask you the same question. What do you believe are the primary causes of this disproportionate impact of young Black men incarcerated in the state and in Prince George's County?
Thank you for that question. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here tonight, as well as those who invited us for this real important opportunity to have a real important and open discussion about our mass incarceration in the state of Maryland and a disproportionate number of men and women of color, particularly Black Americans who are in this system. When you say what is the reason for the overwhelming number, in my view, when you look at Prince George's County, Baltimore City, two big urban populated areas with predominantly African Americans in it. So when you look at the rural areas of the state, of course, African Americans are going to have more and people of color will be more in the prison system because we have more individuals in the urban setting. And what we have to really look at is we have this honest conversation, how these young men and get into our system. Certainly we can talk about their juvenile delinquency. We can talk about some of the family issues that have impacted them to the extent that they are now members of our penal system. But we also have to look at what James Foreman Jr. said in his book, Locking Up Our Own, when he talks about, we talk about as a racist system, but there are Black prosecutors, Black judges, and a whole African-American law enforcement system that's helping create the number of individuals we see incarcerated. But again, we must understand our communities are calling out crime, crime. We got to do something with the crime. But now as we deal with Black Lives Matter, we are uncovering our role in this as well. And I think what we need to do is continue to have these open discussions. And you all should have a discussion with some of our prosecutors around the state, and maybe they'll become progressive like our state's attorney in addressing some of the issues and coming up with alternatives to incarceration. So to answer your question, is a community issue that has created the disproportionate among number of African-American men who are in our penal system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. And you mentioned alternatives to incarceration, and we definitely want to come back to that and have a deeper dive in what some of those alternatives might be. Mr. Franklin, Mel Franklin, thank you so much for joining us. I will ask you the same question.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First, I want to say thank you to the organizers as well as the other panelists. And just to echo some of what's already been said, I think the biggest drivers for mass incarceration really are economic disparities, which then lead to, I think, a lot of criminal conduct that is driven by that despair and those disparities. When you look at nonviolent drug offenses, when you look at other offenses even less serious, we really have to look at the kind of offenses that are resulting in so much of our incarceration in our community. And then I'm really more talking about nonviolent offenses and those kind of offenses that are really driving up those numbers. And then, you know, and I'm sure as our state's attorney has seen, you know, you start to see young men particularly, but young people get caught up in the system shortly after their juvenile years are over. And then it worsens into more serious conduct because they're already trapped in the system. So they get trapped in the system through less serious conduct. And because they then get that criminal record, it impedes their ability to get employment, housing, other things that then traps them in a cycle of criminal conduct. Ultimately, the real answer is, you know, how do we create legitimate pathways for our young people in particular, but other ex-offenders so that they don't get trapped in this cycle of going back to the same kind of conduct that got them there in the first place. If our society continues to so aggressively discriminate against those who've gotten convictions, we're going to continue to have the same problem. If ex-offenders cannot find adequate and successful employment and economic opportunities, entrepreneurship, other opportunities, those members of our society are going to continue to be in this cycle. So if we don't address the questions of, you know, how long should it be before a felony conviction stops preventing you from getting a job or getting housing? How long is it going to be before misdemeanor prevents you from getting employment or getting housing? If we don't address those issues, we're going to continue to have the same conversation 20, 30 years from now. And we know that those issues are going to disproportionately impact persons of color, particularly African Americans and particularly African American men and boys. I want to congratulate my colleague, Vice Chair Calvin Hawkins, for his work on this issue. He's leading a reentry effort for the County Council right now. We're pursuing legislation to try to incentivize employers to hire returning citizens. I want to congratulate our state's attorney. She's a leader nationally in the issues of restorative justice and other ways of diversion. And even recently had a conversation with folks from her office about other ways of getting our young men and young people to go to different pathways and using incentives to try to get them there as alternatives to incarceration. So we're all focused on this work. But at the end of the day, if we don't address the true economic issues and economic disparities and economic justice issues, I think this is going to continue to be a problem for us long term. The generational wealth gap impacts the Black community in particular because of the vestiges of slavery. It in particular impacts the Black community more than any other community in our country. And that is evident in the issue of mass incarceration, just as it is evident in other issues impacting us. But thank you and look forward to tonight's discussion.
Thank you. And we appreciate your comments, and you're raising a very important issue regarding economic disparity and how it is tied in with folks who have a criminal record. We call them returning citizens, returning to their communities and trying to take care of themselves and their families, and we know that very often they suffer a lot of discrimination. Our next panelist is Eric Barron. If you could answer the same question, let me know if you need me to repeat the question. What do you see as some of the main things that drive to what we're seeing now with the increased, extensive incarceration of young Black men in our state?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me here. And it's an honor to be joined with my Prince George's family and colleagues on the panel. They've said a lot. What I would add, or maybe say in a different way, at least three things I'd like to point out. And the first is, just very simply and broadly, we have a justice system that in many ways codifies and exacerbates long-standing racial and socioeconomic inequality, dating back since at least the Jim Crow era. You can draw a direct line from Jim Crow to many of the laws we still have on the books. Two, if you look at when someone gets justice involved, from the arrest through pretrial, through the trial process, sentencing, and through and including reentry and supervision, there's discretion at each one of those steps. And that discretion is inevitably exercised disproportionately against Black men. And so from that point on, from arrest through, it builds on and builds on. And then when you have the cycle that Councilmember Franklin talked about, it's almost impossible to break through. And lastly, I'd point out, and all these things are interrelated, but we criminalize poverty, we criminalize healthcare issues, fines and fees that will send you into prison, mental illness will send you into jail in our state and our country. The disease of addiction will have you incarcerated. 2/3 of our incarcerated population are there for nonviolent drug offenses. So, those are, three things that we have to contend with, and it's a lot. So I'm glad we have in this panel to, delve into how we can, further make grounds on reversing what is an injustice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you all have raised some very important issues, and I appreciate your responses to our first question. And I want to look at the questions that have come up in chat, and I will just ask one of the questions, and then I think we may have a question posed to you all from Ms. Pruitt. One of the questions that came up in chat, we don't have a community demand on comprehensive reentry programming. What can be done to support Maryland individuals, returning citizens, as they are exiting the justice system? And I will throw that out for anyone.
May I take a stab at that?
Sure.
Please?
Yes.
I'm not a returning citizen, I'm not an ex-offender, but I am a reformed citizen, someone who spent 5 years and 9 months of my life in prison. So I know the other side, the side where grown men cry. The question that was asked, one of the things that I first saw when I got on the county council was the lack of reformative initiatives for those who were returning from incarceration. It was individuals like Councilmember Mel Franklin and the other council members that were open to having these real discussions about how we help. And one of the challenges we face, and it's good that we have a supportive state's attorney, but one of the challenges we face, and even talking to the county exec, she was on board, there's not a real connection between individuals who are incarcerated when they return home. I'm dealing with an individual now, he's been home for maybe 45 days after 21 years. And the challenges he's facing with just getting his ID, just getting the things he need to get a job. You know, you need identification in order to get things. From the time he was in prison to the individuals he's working with out here, there's such a disconnect. And one of the things at the local level that I'm really concerned about is how we change individuals coming specifically back to Prince George's, whether they're coming from a federal prison, a state prison, or our local jail, having the necessary documentation to get them the kind of services they need, and setting up with Councilmember Franklin a program that not only give them opportunities to work, but housing. Many people ask us, well, what about halfway houses in the county? You all need to put halfway houses in the county. No, you got to go and talk to those communities, because you all know how it is. We all talk about reform and liberation, but how many of us really want a halfway house in our community? So those are some of the challenges we face on the council with coming up with ideas. But I assure you, for the next 2 years that I'm in office, working with my colleagues, reentry and reformative initiatives to help individuals returning to our community is high on my list of priorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do any of our panelists, other panelists, want to respond to that question?
Yes, I would like to respond. I think this is a real critical and very important issue. And I think we also have to recognize that people are returning differently. Because there are people who've been in the system or been incarcerated for maybe a year, 18 months, 5 years. Their needs are very different than those who've been in for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or some even longer. Because there's a psychological impact that happens and occurs when you have been confined for, let's say, the majority of your life. Because if you are an emerging adult and you go in to prison at 18, 19, and you've spent 20 or 25 years in, you've spent over half of your life being told what to do, when you can eat, when you can sleep, what work you can perform. It is, and the world has changed, right? There's cell phones, there's technology, there's so many things that you did not experience in a real way because you were confined in a prison. And so recognizing that there's also psychological services that we need to ensure that we provide. And I meant to, and I kicked myself because I meant to say to your first question, and I think I answered it from a state's attorney perspective, looking at the crimes. And what I can tell you is that behind all of those crimes, what we see are pain, we see broken people, we see people who need help, who did not have the, I think, necessary support systems as children. And so they grew up as broken children, and they remain broken as they went into adulthood. And so being able to take care of the emotional needs of people is so important. And the basics, sometimes they don't know how to even have a conversation. So can you imagine when you say, okay, we want to make sure that we have jobs and employment for folks, but if that person can't even have a conversation with a prospective employer, then it's very difficult for that person to just survive in the real world out here. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that we need different types of support systems for people depending on how they're returning. And the other thing I think is important, and something that we're looking to establish, and we've reached out to our members of our council, and we'll be reaching out to our delegation, including folks like our chair, Mr. Barron, is to recognize that when people go away, they're still a part of our community. And so when we say, okay, we need reentry, to me, reentry should start when that sentence is given, when that sentence is imposed, even though that person may not physically be in Prince George's County. We know that their connections and ties are likely to our county. So when they return, they're going to return physically to our county, but the reality is they've never really left. They never really left. And so we need to have a way to set up mentorship opportunities and connect those individuals with someone in the community that can be their advocate, that can connect with them while they're doing their time, and then help them as they come back physically into our community. Because again, we can't think of these people as, oh, well, they're there. Because at some point, 9 times out of 10, they're coming back, and they're coming back to our county. And so they're still, I believe, I still am their state's attorney. I still care about them too. But we need to do a better job, I think, of connecting with people. So mentors from the county, I think, are important. In addition to that, we need to have job training and development and mental health services for people that are returning to our community, because for the most part, they're in there because they haven't learned how to cope, because they don't have appropriate impulse control, because they didn't have their emotional needs taken care of as children. That's why they end up committing offenses and end up in jail and end up in prison. And so unless we address those issues, it's going to be very difficult for them to be successful in our communities. But I believe they can be successful. See, I believe in that power, but I think that we have to invest more of our time and our resources into making that transition work.
Thank you so much for your comment, Ms. State's Attorney. We appreciate that. And we do know that when we talk about sending individuals to prison, we really do send families to prison. So it's families that are impacted, especially when we talk about the women that we send to prison. We know that children and extended family members are also impacted. And so we thank you for those comments. And I believe that Ms. Pruitt is going to pose a question or make a comment at this time, and then we'll go to round 2 of our questions.
Thanks, Orlinda, and thanks to all of our elected officials for your comments. One of the things we continue to see, no matter who we put in office, from the state down to our local legislators in our council and in our county executive, even though we elect Black leaders to represent us, we are still talking about the same challenges of reentry, the disproportionate number of Black males coming from Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and Baltimore County. And at each of those points, even when we have a Democratic governor and we control the legislator, we control the Senate, we control the State House in terms of Democrats, this comes up over and over and over again. And when we talk to our reentry population who are coming out, the first thing they say is, we don't have resources. We don't have support. So what can our policymakers do to ensure that not just policy, but that money follows that policy from the state, the local level, our state's attorney, all could implement programs, get funding. We as a local organization would love to partner and go after larger funding, but we have to put those initiatives in place, because if we don't have the money, we'll be back here over and over again talking about the same challenges that our reentry population is experiencing. So when we elect leaders that look like us and that look like the community that's being incarcerated, why are we not making this a priority in terms of funding that goes along with fixing the problem?
So I'll take a stab at it. And thank you for that question, Sandy. I think a few years ago, I happened to be on a panel with Delegate Barron, who Delegate Barron is there's probably nobody in Annapolis more, that is a more aggressive advocate on this issue than Delegate Eric Barron. So it's definitely great to see him and hear his thoughts on this. But at that event that we attended a few years ago, I made the comment that there just isn't an agenda around reentry that is is being pushed and advocated for the way that you see other agendas. I mean, when we run for office every 4 years, we get demands from unions and environmental groups and a variety of groups from one end of the spectrum to the other, but we don't really hear from the reentry community. I think we as elected officials have to work more in tandem with activists to really craft what is the agenda around reentry, and how do we then hold folks accountable who are running for office, as well as once they get elected, for that agenda. What are the demands for improving reentry in Prince George's County and across Maryland? What's our list of 10 or 20 policy changes that we want to see? Do we want to see prohibitions against employment discrimination, housing discrimination on the basis of felonies that are more than 5 years old or misdemeanors more than 3 years old? Do we want to see incentive programs around encouraging employers to hire returning citizens? I can tell you right now, I encounter employers all the time who are interested in hiring returning citizens. It would be good to organize those employers in some one-stop shop fashion, where if you're a returning citizen, you know all of the employers, for example, in Prince George's County, who are willing to hire returning citizens. To really answer your question, Sandy, I would say it's more than just electing people who happen to be African-American. As my colleague Calvin Hawkins can tell you, we've had African-American elected officials for a couple of decades now in Prince George's County, actually beyond that, several decades. But we still struggle to get good participation for awarding contracts to African-American owned businesses in Prince George's County. That's even with African-Americans running procurement, running county government. So it's not just good enough to elect African-American public officials. We have to elect them with an agenda that we then hold, I say them, us, that we hold us accountable to. That's really what it comes down to. If it was a labor union, that's what, that's what they would do. That's what they do. They hold us accountable. And they get their agenda accomplished. So I would just say that that's really, I think, the recipe, not just on the issues of reentry, the issues of minority and Black-owned business opportunity, the issues of other issues of equity and disparity that I don't think can be separated out from this issue of reentry. All of these issues are connected to the fundamental issue of economic disparity and disparities of generational wealth for people who are descendants of slaves. I think I think that if the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't teach us anything else, it should teach us that we have not finished the work of remedying the vestiges of slavery. And that's endemic to this issue too.
Now, Councilmember Franklin, there have been the reentry roundtable groups. I think when each new elected officials come into office, there seems to be a new advisory council, a new reentry roundtable. I mean, so where are the elected officials looking for the voice for the reentry population? Where are they expecting that to come from?
Councilmember Franklin, after you respond, I would like to respond to
Now, I
Sandy's
defer to you,
second
Mr. Vice
question.
Chair.
Sandy, thank you for that question, but we have, with our reentry advisory board, one is not going to be a long-term board. It's a board that's in place to assess what's happening, what resources are available for returning citizens. And I want to say this: when you have individuals like former First Lady Leslie Johnson, former council member, when you have individuals like Judge Alex Williams on there, and then you have some individuals who are sharing because they have been on that other side, and then you have some of the government agencies involved, from the sheriff department to corrections to family services, talking about these resources and what these individuals may need. You have to also understand this board is not just there because a politician, someone got elected and got to check the box. This is an organization that's serious about coming up with suggestions and initiatives that the council can implement to ensure that every individual coming back to Prince George's County get a chance to succeed. And what you need to know about what I'm saying, we also are assessing all the organizations that have been getting Prince George's County public dollars to help returning individuals. And if most of the money is going to the administrative side, they should know we're coming after that funding, and we're going to give it to organizations that's serious about helping individuals returning to our society. And one of the most important organizations we have watched do this time in and time out is Employ Prince George's. They have been doing an outstanding job helping returning citizens get employed. So those are the models we're looking at, and those are the ones we're trying to emulate to ensure that Prince George's County can compete with the region and the state in serving our returning citizens.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hawkins. And we know that one of the barriers that certainly I see in my work is, and I hope that this will change, is that the Department of Corrections mandates that if you are in contact with someone while they are in, that you cannot have contact with them when they are returning to the community and still be a volunteer in the institution. That certainly needs to change, because how do we expect people to have a smooth transition if their sources of support are not able to go in, volunteer, be a part of the transition before the person actually walks out of the door? And we certainly are hoping to change that. I'm going to move on to question number 2 and give our panelists 2 minutes to respond. And then we're going to move into the poll that we're going to do for the evening. So question number 2, what are the steps that you plan to take to impact this disparity? And what, if any, legislative or policy changes do you propose that will make a difference? So this is about holding you all as our representatives accountable. What do you plan to do to try to impact this disparity that we see? And I will start with our state's attorney, Ms. Braveboy.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that question. And let me tell you what we've already done and what we are planning to do with the support of all of you and, of course, my colleagues who are elected officials. So we have expanded our diversion programs in the office since I've been there. We have more diversion programs, and we have grown the number of people in those diversion programs. We also, under the prior state's attorney, who is now our county executive, Angela also Brooks, she brought the Back on Track program that Kamala Harris started when she was the DA in San Francisco here to Prince George's County. And that program gives first-time drug offenders the opportunity to have a clean slate after going through a pretty intensive program. Well, that program served a relatively small number of people because the criteria was so narrow. And so we've now expanded that criteria, and we're in the process of adding more offenses that would be eligible for Back on Track, so that we give more people an opportunity to participate in this program. And not only did we do that, but we have connected with our unions. And I have to tell you that the union agenda must and should include reentry, because unions, more than anyone else that I've seen, are very understanding and will train and hire people who have records. Typically, they don't really care unless the job requires, let's say they want to send you on, requires a security clearance, and depending on the type of crime that you've been convicted of, you may not be eligible. But most of the jobs don't require a security clearance. And I'll give you an example. Recently, we had a graduation for Back on Track. One of our successful graduates actually connected through us to a union, has their license as a painter, and now wants to go back and do welding. So I mean, he's really excited now that he's got these skills that he can utilize. We had another individual Back on Track again, got into painting, and now is doing road work, and was hired by the city of Hyattsville. So this is a great partnership that we started with our unions that will continue to grow and expand, because we have to ensure that people are employed. And what unions do is they give you a skill. So you don't necessarily have to work for someone. Once you have certain skills, you can go out and market those skills and be your own boss if that's what you want to do. But it is so important that as a state's attorney that I advocate and draw and make those relationships happen, and we have. But guess what? We're not done yet. We want to grow those because if it works for a handful of people, it's going to work for hundreds of people. And so now the important thing for us would be capacity. Do we have the capacity within our unions to do the types of training, or train as many people as we want to be eligible for these kind of programs? And I think that if we work with them, because they have an infrastructure already set up to do that type of training, and you don't have to want to be a painter, you don't have to want to be a welder. There's lots of different trades that a person can choose from, but as long as we are making those commitments to them, I believe that our union partners will work with us, and our minority business partners. Let me tell you, minority businesses are more inclined to give chances and second chances to people who have committed offenses in our communities, because guess what? Most of them grew up in our community, so they already know the people. They don't feel intimidated by them. They're not scared of them. They don't look at them as subhuman. They look at them as people who they know, who they might have went to school with.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we also challenge our minority businesses and support. And going back to what Councilmember Mel Franklin said, let's support our minority businesses, those that are located here. They are invested in the people here. They're more likely to give those opportunities, but we got to give them the opportunity. See, I feel like we have a lot of infrastructure. What we're not doing is investing in that infrastructure that's already exist here. We already have businesses, Black-owned businesses here that never get contracts in Prince George's County, but they may get them elsewhere, but they don't get them in our county, and we're spending our tax dollars. I really feel like we have a real opportunity. I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about this, but I feel like we have a real opportunity.
And I certainly agree with you that such a program needs to be expanded. In Prince George's County alone, we have about 400 returning citizens every year, and certainly the capacity needs to make sure that everybody is given an opportunity. And so, Mr. Barron, I want to pose to you that same question. What are the steps that you plan to take to impact this disparity that we see that we've been talking about all evening?
Thank you. So I plan to continue and double down on the work that I've been doing since being elected. We're talking about issues that are, near and dear to me, been the focus of my professional career, basically. So what have I been working on? So a few examples. The elimination of fines and fees. These things, fines and fees, are just insidious really throughout the Maryland code, and they criminalize you for being poor, basically. This past session, I finally got through a bill that eliminates fines and fees for juveniles. So we're going to keep at it for everyone else.
Especially, I'm sorry to interrupt, but especially because people are making money off of people who are not able to pay these fines and fees.
Amen. And speaking of fines and fees and bail reform, pretrial reform, so I've been right in the middle of leading on reforming our pretrial system and trying to make sure that people are not detained and incarcerated simply because they don't have any money.
Right.
So this is an ongoing fight. Some of what I've done to support that effort is pass legislation that established a grant fund to beef up pretrial services so that courts have options and alternatives aside from jail and home detention. The Justice Reinvestment Act. I was a member of the Coordinating Council for the Justice Reinvestment Act and one of the floor leaders and co-authors of the bill. Some of the provisions related to this conversation that I had a lot to do with was the elimination of mandatory minimums for drug offenses, the elimination of the crack powder cocaine disparity, and the adding reforming of the supervision and reentry practices so people aren't unfairly sent back into prison after they've been released. More recently, this past session, I also introduced a bill called the Second Look Act to give those who are serving long sentences an opportunity based on evidence-based research to have their sentence reduced, to take another look after someone's potentially reformed and spent a long time in prison to see who they are now. And based on the research, what kind of risk do they pose? It's a hard effort. All of these efforts have been extraordinarily difficult. And, there was a question about, voting for and getting people in office who look like us. Well, every effort that I just outlined did not come with the automatic support of legislators who look like us. It takes people on the ground to hold each one of us accountable, to keep poking at us at every step of the way to make sure that we are doing what we say we're doing and representing your interests. And on every one of those efforts, I've had the partnership, because this is a team effort. It's a team effort. You can't vote and elect someone and then, hope it works out. So the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform has been there at each one of those, with me on each one of those efforts. The NAACP, OSI Baltimore, the Job Opportunities Task Force, the ACLU, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, Out for Justice.
And we're going to continue to be there.
Yes. So, those are some of the things I've been working on. We've had some success, not enough, obviously. There's a lot more to go. So I'm going to keep pounding the pavement on each one of those efforts, and just generally, kind of screaming from the mountaintop about the decriminalization of poverty and healthcare issues, particularly mental illness.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Franklin, we want to also hold you accountable. What are what are you planning to do?
Yep. So Councilmember Hawkins and I have a piece of legislation called the Second Chance Act of 2020. It would create an incentive pattern off of something that's working well in Philadelphia to subsidize wages for employers who hire returning citizens. So that legislation is pending before the county council, and we got money placed in the budget to create a pilot program that once that legislation is enacted, that it would be supported by that funding, so that there'd be funding to actually make that program happen. And if it's successful, the hope was that it could be expanded to a much bigger program, even beyond the initial funding allocation. The idea is, let's create incentives to get employers to hire returning citizens. We know there are a number of them already do. Let's create other incentives to make it broader. The second big thing that I think we could do, and it's something that I look forward to talking to my colleague, Councilman Hawkins, and other members of the council, as well as the county executive, is to put in place a new piece of civil rights legislation, if you will, that prohibits discrimination based on convictions that are felony convictions when the sentence has been completed beyond 5 years or more, and no reoffenses have happened, or misdemeanors that are 3 years old or more, where the sentence or penalty is completed and no reoffenses have occurred. I think that's something, it might be controversial, but I think that's something that we should take a serious look at and look at, because that is a big impediment to a lot of our returning citizens staying on a pathway of the straight and narrow. So definitely want to do that. And then we should probably take a look at housing. That involves some more complicated issues, but I think we have to take a look at housing as well. But I think first and foremost, employment is the area we should tackle initially, and really try to address the barriers that I encounter, and I'm sure Councilman Hawkins and State's Attorney Brayboy, as well as Delegate Barron and others, we encounter many returning citizens who simply are very qualified to do work in the county, but cannot get hired because once a background check is done, that disqualifies them. We passed a legislation several years ago called the Ban the Box legislation that was passed in jurisdictions around the country. The problem with that legislation is that, yeah, it allows you to get to potentially an interview, but once that interview occurs, then the background check happens, and then you are knocked out of contention. So that only took it a step in the right direction, but didn't go far enough. So I think it's time to have that conversation about discrimination on the basis of convictions that are old, and that and give true second chances to our residents.
So would that include sealing records to make sure that that information is not available to anyone, or like in some jurisdictions, it's not available to a very limited number of people, but very much available to law enforcement and other agencies?
So the idea, it's questionable whether the county can seal records. I think that's a state law change that must occur. So I'm not sure the county can seal criminal records, but what the county can do is prohibit employers from conducting background checks and discriminating on the basis of convictions that are, as I mentioned, 5 years or older. If you're felony and then when I say 5 years old, I mean the sentence has been completed for more than 5 years, as well as misdemeanors 3 or more years. So we probably don't have the authority without some state law to seal records. That's more of what the state can do. We do have the authority to prohibit and punish employers who do discriminate on the basis of, like I just mentioned. One of the other things I would also say is that, we on the local level certainly can create incentives. We certainly can prohibit discrimination on the basis of these things, but we have to, I think, also put funding behind enforcement. We have a Human Relations Commission who likely would be empowered to enforce these kind of laws. We can put all the laws on the books we want. If we don't have well-funded enforcement, all of this is just smoke and mirrors.
Thank you.
Sure.
Calvin Hawkins, I pose to you the same question. What steps do you plan to take to impact this disparity that we've been talking about all evening?
What steps I have taken was to ensure that I could get enough votes from my colleague to establish the Re-Entry Advisory Board with prominent leaders in our community, from who I named earlier, former First Lady and Council Member Leslie Johnson to Judge Alex Williams, to community activists like Latasha Ward and Amity Pope. And we are doing important things to come up with the kind of reform that a host of individuals are talking about. And so when you think of, when I say what I'm doing, I'm listening to this group, waiting for the ideas that come out of that group. And also I've used my oversight authority as the chair of the Health, Human Service, and Public Safety Committee to ask each agency that deals with re-entry, returning citizens, or the incarcerate, what are they doing, what kind of programs they have implemented. And I have not just watched them on paper. I've actually had the committee look into if they are really doing what they say they're doing on paper. That's council oversight. And I would also like to add, one of the challenges we dealt with, the undocumented individuals who were being detained after they were found either innocent or they couldn't hold them on a charge, but they were holding them for the immigration to come and pick them up. With the help of my colleagues, we came up with some very aggressive legislation to prevent that from happening, even while our law enforcement officials were saying that this is something in the court that is going to be overturned and the county will lose a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars if we did not let the immigration department come and take those undocumented individuals. And yet this council held strong. We were prepared to override the county executive vote if she had vetoed this important documentation. And fortunately, the courts came out and said that it was illegal for prisons to hold individuals once they have been found innocent. So I wanted to say that. And lastly, I'm gonna say this, something some of you may not receive, but one of my main goals is to build a state-of-the-art prison, because the prison the individuals are in down in Upper Marlboro, the Prince George's County Detention Center is old, is outdated, and none of us will want any of our family members in a place like that. So I'm working to do that. And lastly, anything we do, I'm going to check with Pete Goodson over at Employee Prince George's and ask him, is this kind of legislation the kind that can make an impact on our individuals returning from the community? Because Pete is the measure of success when it comes to working with returning individuals. And I want to ensure that we get his input when we get to the end. And again, I want to thank Councilmember Mel Franklin for his leadership on legislation that'll get us to a better answer to the question you asked. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Hawkins. And we certainly know that during these times of COVID, the Prince George's County Jail is not a place that we want our loved ones to be. I know that there are some pieces of litigation that are currently underway regarding trying to decrease that population in order to make it safer for people who are confined there, especially during these times of the COVID-19. So thank you all for your responses to the second question. And believe me, we will be coming back to you to follow up. We love all of the ideas that you all shared with us, but we will come back and do some follow-up and certainly offer support, not just to come and say, what are you doing, but to also offer support and when there are opportunities for us to work in partnership to get some things done.
Erlinda, this is Sandy. I just had a quick follow-up to Delegate Eric Barron, and I just want to make certain the listeners are aware that Eric Barron was one of 3 Black males who served at the state on for the Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, the Justice Reinvestment Act was approved in the 2019 legislative session at the state. In that bill, 1.7 million in local grants went to organizations in 8 counties that were working on reentry measures. And when you look at the counties that got the money, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Frederick County, Howard County, Wicomico County, and Worcester County. And when it came, and then the one organization that they said was from Prince George's County is actually headquartered in Baltimore. So when you look at the dollars that we need to bring back home from the state, we need to have representatives at the state that are ensuring that those dollars get to Prince George's County. And we really need those reinvestment dollars. So when we're serving on these committees, and we're one of only 3 Black males on a committee of 23, we need to have strong voices to ensure that when you talk about 1.7 million, that we get those dollars to Prince George's County to help our reentry population. So we can't say we're going to help them if we don't get the dollars to them. So that needs to be in terms of accountability. This bill has already been approved. So every year, dollars will be coming from the state. We need to ensure that those dollars reach our reentry population in Prince George's County.
Let me,
and if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
And so what that bill also did was establish an oversight council that lived beyond the initial coordinating council that came up with the recommendations for the bill. And the oversight council, and I forget exactly what the name is, but Justice Reinvestment Oversight Board or some such title, has representatives from the county level, the state level, different organizations, and it's that board that decides where the money goes. We have, I believe there are 2 or 3 lawmakers on that board. I'm not on it, but there's at least 1 or 2 delegates and 1 or 2 senators. And in addition to your state, local elected officials, there are those who are appointed to these different task forces, commissions, etc. And they need to be held accountable also, just like everyone else.
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to make sure that people know that there is that body that's making these big decisions about funding, that everyone on this call and on this video should be looking up and should know when and where they meet.
Yes, and holding them accountable also.
And also, Eric, this is Jerry. The PFC Black Chamber and the coalition, and I'm going to be talking over with Major. We would like to have a meeting with the Prince George County delegation. Since Crystal is the out in Baltimore as well, the chair of the Central Committee in Baltimore County, we would like to ask Eric if we can have a meeting with the Prince George's County delegation to talk about what's our agenda is going to be when y'all go down there in January, because we have to make sure that we rectify this disparity when it comes to funding after all the work that Major has done to get this bill passed for the JRC. And we see a huge disparity in this funding, Eric, and our
No other delegation meets weekly like
no,
we
no,
do.
no, no, no. I'm just saying, whatever you guys meet for,
so we're happy to have you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We're happy to have you. We anybody who reaches out to us, we make every effort to schedule for.
Right. I would send you a formal letter on that.
Thank you so much. So we have launched our poll, and I see that 54 individuals have participated in our poll. The question is, what do you think are the most important factors causing the disproportionate incarceration of young Black men? Please select 3 that you believe are most important. Unfair police practices, the need for more investment and economic opportunities, prosecutorial practices, extreme sentences by judges, the need for more meaningful parole and release options, that prisons should be more rehabilitative and not punitive, the need for stronger family ties, the need for wraparound services before prison reentry, cash bail, and parole, probation, supervision obstacles. What do you think are the most important factors causing the disproportionate incarceration of young Black men? We want to make sure that we capture this information so that we can know what's on the mind of Prince George's County residents, and so that our representatives know what's on the mind of Prince George's County representatives. And while you all are taking a few more minutes to respond to the poll, I want to once again thank our panelists for this evening. State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your comments. Eric Barron, thank you so much, not just for your comments, but also for your work. Calvin Hawkins, we appreciate your being with us this evening. And Mel Franklin.
Thanks for having me. Can I mention one thing?
Yes.
Jerry, you mentioned you wanted to meet with the delegation in January. I recommend to you that might be too late. And Delegate Barron can tell you this, they're writing legislation now. So if you want to impact the upcoming, assuming it happens, the upcoming session of the General Assembly, I would encourage you to engage, even on an individual basis, members of the delegation, both on the House delegation as well as the Senate delegation, around an agenda that you want to push. I encourage you to use the advice, the sage advice of Delegate Barron when you do so, but I would encourage you to do that now and definitely not wait till January.
Well, thank you, Councilman Franklin. I really appreciate that. And I also would like to touch base with you about the type of legislation that you think that we should be able to be focusing on when they go down to Annapolis in
Sure.
January.
I think Delegate Barron is your best source, but I'm happy to help too.
Okay, so we have 83% participation in the poll. So we're going to keep it up for 1 more minute to allow the remaining few of you to add your vote in.
Linda, can I just
Yes.
mention one thing? Thank you so
Yes.
much. So my office has embarked upon a really important mission, and that is to really address the issue of juvenile lifers. We have maybe about 87 or so individuals who've been sentenced to life. But when they received those sentences, they were under the age of 18. As you know, the Supreme Court has said that sentencing a juvenile to life without the possibility of parole is essentially unjust.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's still, questions around life sentences for juveniles and also just very lengthy sentences for individuals who are juveniles. And as Eric Barron knows, because he introduced the Second Look Act, it is really difficult to get these matters back before the court unless within the first, I think, 5 years, there's a reconsideration of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And usually after 5 years, judges aren't ready at that point to reconsider a sentence. But perhaps after 10 years or 15 or 20 or 30 years, or hopefully it wouldn't be 30, but they may be, but it's really difficult to get those matters back before the court. My office has done something, I think, extraordinary. We've been able to really get these matters with willing judges before the court for reconsideration. We had our first juvenile lifer who we resentenced to reentry court, and he is now back out in the community. That happened last year. We have a few others that are currently going through that pipeline, and then we have more down the road. So Linda, being a defense attorney, I'm going to call upon you to help represent some of those individuals who are juvenile lifers, because they do need representation. And even though oftentimes we are supportive of their plight because we've read their institutional history, we're comfortable with them moving forward, they need representation while they're moving forward. And so we want to call on folks like you to assist with that. And then we also really do need a real reentry process. And Calvin, I'm going to call on you and Mel Franklin to assist with that, because these are individuals, most of them have been in jail or prison, 25 years or longer.
Mm-hmm.
They went in as children, they're grown men now, and women, because we do have a woman who's going through the process also. So I really think that we need to pay a lot of attention to the juvenile lifers. And what will happen is, once you see how successful they are, I think it'll open doors for other individuals who have received lengthy sentences. See, the community wants to know that we care about them too. We care about the victim, we care about the safety of the community, and we do. But just like you and others have said, it is unlikely that these individuals will reoffend. Actually, the likelihood that they will reoffend is very, very small. The question is, are we going to give them that opportunity? Do we truly believe in redemption, rehabilitation? And if we do, then I have to be courageous, which I have been, and I need to be able to get the resources to them that they need, so that when they do come back into our communities, they are successful, they have jobs, they have opportunities. But juvenile lifers, this issue, I'm telling you, is near and dear to me, and it's something that we're working very hard on, and we can certainly use your legal expertise, Linda, and we can use all of you here supporting that effort.
And the thank you so much for that. The experts, the research, all support that, right? Even when you look at JPI's report, and I believe that Mark or Ryan are still with us, but it clearly talks about, the development of the brain, and the person who commits an offense when they are 18 years old, might not fully understand the consequences of his action. because of that. And so, yes, there's a lot of information out there that really supports that conclusion. And we are hoping that we will see more juvenile lifers who can be returned to their communities and to their families. And so I just want to report out a little bit from what we're seeing regarding the poll that was launched. It looks like a fair amount of you believe that unfair police practices and the need for more investment and economic opportunities play a large role in what we're seeing as it relates to the disparities. And also, 52% prison should be rehabilitative and not punitive. So we can take the poll down and we will make sure that we share the results certainly with everyone who is on the call tonight, and we want to make sure that information is available also to you as our community leaders.
Oh, Linda, may I say one thing?
Yes,
This
I'm
is
sorry.
Calvin.
The poll is blocking you, so I can't see you raising
Okay,
your
no
hand.
problem. Okay, no
Yes.
problem. I just wanted to add to what State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy spoke about. Will the juvenile lifers in the state of Maryland get a second chance? When you think about Thomas Weems, he's been in for 53 years. Kenneth Tucker, 44 years. Alonzo Tucker Bay, 31 years. And there are numbers higher than that. So I was going to ask, as you all said of us, Major said of us in your comments, that you're going to hold us accountable for the statements and commitments that we made on this call tonight. I would encourage and ask Major as an organization to get deeper involved in advocating for these individuals that State's Attorney Braveboy spoke about, getting another chance, a second chance to return to our society.
Thank you. Yes, you can certainly count on Major. Major's been around long before I became a member and participant, and I'm sure that we're not going anywhere. And I'm sure the same is true for People for Change. And so we want to just give our panelists, I want to just check and see if there were any outstanding issues that I needed to address. I just want to give our panelists, including Ms. Pruitt, an opportunity to just make some closing comments. I thank everybody for participating in the poll tonight. Your information will certainly be used to support our efforts. And I do want to just check to see whether Mark or Ryan, if you're on the line, since we've referred to your report so much throughout the evening, if you'd like to make a comment about the report, you're certainly welcome to do that before I get closing remarks from our panelists.
Okay, this is Sandy. One of the things I hope we get from this, there were a lot of great questions and comments in the chat area, and I'd like to see that maybe summarized and shared with all the participants who participated in the webinar this evening, because we had people who were concerned about women who are coming out, reentering in, as well as housing, resources. The biggest thing is resources. And one of the things we've heard from the coalition is that our returning citizens want to be entrepreneurs. They want to start their own business, and they believe that they've done their time. And when they come out on the other side, we should have resources in place to help them start a business. And so we have developed and created a program called TIE, Transitioning from Incarceration to Entrepreneurship, but it needs to get funded. And so we need to listen to what our reentry population is saying and ensure that we have the resources to support them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy. And we will save the chat and make sure that we reconnect with everybody who's on the call this evening. Again, we thank our panelists for participating and for spending almost 2 hours of your time with us this evening. We really appreciate it. And we're going to give you just a few minutes to give some closing comments.
And listen, stop throwing these pillows like this. Make it neater because
we can hear
that way
you
it won't.
online.
The way it won't.
Okay, that's the other I used.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Hawkins, we can start with you. You want to give some closing comments?
Just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for all those men and women who may not have an opportunity to tell any of you or each of you or one of you how grateful they are for the work you're doing. Even if some of them may never see this side of life again, the fact that they got earnest, committed people standing in the gap, raising issues to make it better for maybe not them, but those to come who have come through our penal system. So I'm grateful. And if any of you want to be involved with what we're doing, please don't hesitate. Like I said, we have individuals working hard to make a difference in Prince George's County. It's not just Calvin Hawkins, Mel Franklin on the council, or the state delegates and senators, or state attorney Aisha Brave, or even our county exec. It's the individuals like each and every one of you who are holding us accountable, raising the issues that matter. And by the end, when we all get through with this, maybe we can look back and say, because of our collective efforts, we made a difference in the plight of those who are returning from incarceration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Ms. Braveboy.
Yeah, so thank you very much. This was a great conversation. I learned so much about what my colleagues are doing. Even though we talk a lot, it seems that I learned some new things. So I'm really excited about working with them. But one of the things I just wanted to really mention is that this work is tough, because while we have a lot of like minds on this Zoom call here, there are a lot of people who are not on board. And there are a lot of people who are part in the justice system who are not on board. And so it's really important that, you know, we recognize that that the work we are doing is difficult. We are going to run into obstacles, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to do it. And so while I might face criticism as a state's attorney because I'm trying to give folks second chances, and maybe people think I should just be focused on, you know, victims and prosecuting individuals. But the reality is my job is not to prosecute, it is to do justice. And sometimes that means prosecuting individuals, and sometimes it means giving people second chances. And so recognizing that my job is that comprehensive, is that full, it's not one dimensional, it's multi-dimensional. But I need your support. And so when I call on you to say, hey, I need your support for a program or initiative I'm going to do, it's because I really do need it. Because again, I'm dealing with a system that doesn't understand why I want to do certain things. They don't appreciate it. And in fact, in some cases, they may think this is anti what I should be doing or what the system should be about. And so there are people like you, though, who really get it, who really understand safety is important. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows people need to be safe. Everyone needs to know knows that people need to be held accountable for their actions. But you also understand that people have the ability to change, have the ability to be rehabilitated. Not everyone grew up with the opportunities that maybe some of us had. I know I didn't have it hard. Let me tell you, I did not have a hard life, you know? And so I try not to judge people, their character, their total character by their mistakes. And I've made my own mistakes. Now they have not been criminal, but I've made mistakes. And so I try to understand that people can change. People have the capacity to change. But it's people like you who are spokespeople in the community that can really make a difference. So I thank you so much for the work you do. I look forward to seeing many of you in Annapolis when we go down to testify on bills. And Olinda, I'm looking forward to seeing you across the other council desk representing some of these juvenile lifers. You know, I'm gonna hold you to that.
Please do. I've got it. We'll chat. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Franklin. Closing comments, please. And I thank you again for your time this evening.
Sure. Just want to thank you and thank you, the organizers and my fellow panelists, and especially want to thank all of you who tuned in this evening. I want to really get the point across that the issues of reentry and returning citizens oftentimes do not have an aggressive enough advocacy out there. I'm not attempting to criticize, I'm just saying we need to hear from advocates on this issue at budget time. We need to hear from advocates on this issue, obviously in Annapolis. But we need to hear, I think, this voice aggressively year-round. I want to offer, myself as a partner who can help facilitate, and I'm sure all of my other colleagues and panelists would offer that same opportunity to help facilitate that kind of advocacy. But we really, I think, need to raise the volume of this issue. Returning citizens, the community of returning citizens is a community that has challenges with impacting power, political power in our society. And we see that with other communities where you have residents who just don't have the same access to political power that other people have. So I think we're going to have to go, above and beyond to try to make sure that our returning citizens community have their voices heard. Because as I said, usually you don't hear a lobbyist represent returning citizens. I hear lobbyists represent a lot of other groups. You don't hear about, returning citizens don't have PACs necessarily. So they're not making political. So all of these things that impact the political process that we see as elected officials all the time, oftentimes we don't hear from our returning citizens community. And so I mention that because, this is a great conversation, but we've had many great conversations about these issues. If we want this to be different, I think we're going to have to talk differently about what needs to happen out of this conversation. There needs to be a returning citizens PAC, Political Action Committee, that is organizing around candidates and an agenda that will impact the quality of life for returning citizens. There needs to be advocacy in a very organized fashion on these issues. I've said this about issues like minority business opportunities as well. I say the same thing about issues regarding returning citizens. Organizing, impacting the political process, holding elected officials accountable. And I will close by saying this. Don't just expect that elected officials are going to do the right thing just because we're elected officials. We should. Mm-hmm. But if you want to ensure that it happens, you have to hold us accountable and you have to organize in order to do that. Yes. Don't just have the expectation that just because someone's an elected official that they're always going to do, or let me put it this way, that they're always going to have the priorities in mind that you're going to have. Yes. If you want your priorities to be at the forefront, you have to raise your volume and raise your temperature and raise the temperature. And so I want to close by saying that I look forward to continuing to work hard on these issues. They matter in a big way to public safety, to economic opportunity, to educational opportunity, to our overall quality of life.
Thank you so much.
Olinda, Mel Franklin, I mean, you hit it right on, but when groups and organizations, when they speak out, how can we ensure that they don't get penalized for speaking out.
So that's the burden of good trouble. The burden of good trouble is you may suffer some consequences, but I encourage you to not be afraid to make good trouble anyway.
Yeah,
and the difference is when you make good trouble, be organized about it and have a strategy for how you're actually going to mete out consequences.
Yes.
Politically.
Perfect.
I also believe that there should not be decisions made that impact returning citizens without having a returning citizen at the table.
Well, let me say this, Linda, because I'm glad you said that. The decisions that we make on the county council, I'm normally the lead on it, and I am a returning citizen. So
I know, and I'm so glad you're there.
Yeah, I want to say I'm unapologetic about what I do as a leader when it comes to that. And Jerry, to add to what Councilmember Franklin said about your question, we're going to ensure that those opportunities come. But knowing Mel and knowing who I am and knowing who State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy is, there is no issue when it comes to people speaking up, speaking out. Even if we disagree, we should always agree to disagree because we're doing the right thing for those in Prince George's County in the state of Maryland. If we're doing it for that reason, then we can always disagree because it's going to be better when we finish what we're doing. So keep standing up and keep being people for change.
Thank you. I want to check to see whether Mr. Barron is still with us. I'm not sure if he, I believe he had an engagement.
He had another obligation at 8:30.
Okay. And I know that Mark Schindler from JPI has joined us. And if you want to just make some comments, Mark, you've got about 1 minute. We're trying to close out, but I did want to give you a shout out and thank you for your report. Very often we hear about what we know to be true, but seeing it in reports is very, very crucial. So we thank you for your work. Mark, do you want to make a couple of statements?
Sure, I would be happy to, Linda. I had to sign off for a little bit while driving, but I'm back on. I heard most of the first hour, and I just want to give thanks to everyone for your attention to this critically important issue. It's just such an important discussion, and as you said at the outset in the research that we were happy to produce and hope is useful, showed that Maryland is in a crisis right now. We lead the nation in the percentage of Black people who are in our prisons. We lead the nation in the rate of young Black men going to prison for long prison terms. Nothing to be proud of. And so there's a lot of work to be done. I think the conversation tonight has been excellent. And the leadership that folks are showing is really encouraging. And so I hope we can continue to push forward. And the Justice Policy Institute is just happy to be a resource to anyone who's working on these issues. So thanks for the organizers. Thanks to you, Alinda, and of course, all of our elected officials for participating tonight.
Thank you, Mark. I just want to close out by letting everyone know that, yes, we see the questions you've put in chat. We will save them and we will make sure that they are directed to who they should be directed to. There's a lot of information that's been put into chat. If you are interested in volunteering with an organization like Major, we invite you to go to our website, Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform, and we have 3 work groups: front door, behind the walls, and back door. And so whatever your interests are, there's something for you to do. The same is true for the other organization. I don't know, Sandy, if you want to make a statement or two about your organization and how folks can join with your efforts. Sandy or Jerry?
Hi, this is Sandy. Again, thank you everybody for their participation. If you see on the screen, you see information for the People for Change Coalition and also the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform. We have the website and contact information. We invite everybody to please visit the websites for more information on joining and being a part of a very important movement to really improve the quality of life for our returning citizens when they come back.
And we thank everyone again for participating. We know that it's been, we're right at 2 hours. We thank everybody for participating. We especially give thanks to our panelists, Mr. Hawkins, Mr. Melvin, Mr. Barron, and our state's attorney, Aisha Braveboy. Much thanks to you, Sandra, for your participation and for your leadership, and to you also, Jerry, for initiating this discussion and coordinating it. Thank you all very much. I do want to remind everybody to go out and vote. Make sure you vote for the upcoming election. This election is going to be crucial. As we talked about the issues regarding the racial divide that we see in this country, one thing for certain is that this pandemic has magnified all of the disparities that exist in so many of our systems, our educational system, our healthcare system, certainly our criminal justice system. And so it's imperative that you let your voice be heard, yes, on the local level, and we want to hold our executives accountable, but also on the national level. And I would just close out by saying thank you again to everyone. Thank you for participating in the poll, and I wish you all Godspeed. Thank you.